Welcome back. Today we're making a special video about the Middle East, especially Syria, so that people understand a little bit about what we have been talking about and what does this have to do with the conflict in Syria. Okay, as I said, my father was an ambassador at the time of the Vietnam War, so I grew up around war. The Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War, the Soviet Union, the USA, NATO, the war in Lebanon, the war of African freedom, Afghanistan, and so on. The war with narco traffic, the drug cartels, then the war against terrorism. I've been through all of that over the last 40-50 years. And I have personally been boots on the ground in Afghanistan during years, 5 to 7 years at least, during the war between the Soviet Union and the Afghan resistance, the Mujahideen on one side and the Taliban on the other side. So, a little bit about my perspectives. What's going on? So, let's go back, time traveling, to 10,000 years ago. In the Rig Veda in the northwest of India. This was the Indus Valley civilization. Today they know that it is the Indus Saraswati civilization. There was a huge river here in Gujarat, in the north of India, in the west of India, called Saraswati, which dried. And in the Rig Veda, they talk about Mother Saraswati. It's considered today a goddess in India. And in the Rig Veda, they mention how powerful the Saraswati is, how life-giving, the enormous river with the tributaries. And then it dried. And they have an idea that around 6,000 before the contemporary era, which is around 8,000 years ago, it basically dried. So, the Rig Veda is not myth or fantasy. They were talking about the Saraswati River, which really existed. Now we know they have the dried river, the bank of the river, which through the satellites they can see that it existed 10,000 years ago. And 6,000 years ago it dried. And maybe around 15,000 years ago it was really, really, really powerful. So the Saraswati dried, and then the people migrated to the Indus Valley, which is in the center of Pakistan. Other people migrated to the Ganges Valley, which is in Bengal, in the northeast of India. The people migrated. And then the Indus Valley dried 6,000 to 4,000 years ago. This region has been drying. The desert has been forming. So 6,000 years ago to 4,000 years ago, the region started drying seriously. Maybe the key point is that the rains failed. There is mention in the ancient texts that the Indus Valley suffered 200, 300 years of failed rains. The rains just didn't come. The monsoons. They continued to the east of India, to Bengal, to the eastern coast. And that's where you had prosperity, a lot of population. But the western part of India dried. And consequently, as the Saraswati civilization collapsed, no rain. The Indus Valley civilization collapsed, no rain. So what happens? The water is disappearing. Food is disappearing. The farms are shrinking. Two options. You leave or you fight over what's left. So there is a book called the Book of 10 Kings, Das Rajna, where 10 tribes of Indo-Europeans who lived here battled it out. And they mention that in the ancient Rig Vedas of around 10,000 years BC, before the contemporary era, there was a great war in the northern part of India between the Devas and the Asuras. What am I talking about? We have talked about Dios Pitta, the father god, the sky god, the day god. But there is also a concept of Devas, the gods. And these beings came from the sky and had powerful weapons. And they had legions, soldiers. And they were divided in two groups, the Devas and the Asuras. And they had a sky battle, a tremendous battle. In the West, we could say that it is between the gods and the titans, the sons of gods, whatever. There were two powerful groups, the Devas and the Asuras. And in the end, the Asuras lost and migrated to Assyria and became the Assyrians. Western people don't get it because Western people are just focused on the Mediterranean and Europe. They don't understand. The civilization of the West, of the Mediterranean, begins with the Assyrians. But where did the Assyrians come from? The Asuras were expelled from the north of India. In the Iranian tradition, they say that their ancestors were the Asuras. So these Asuras left India and came to what is called today Syria, the Assyrians, the region between Iraq and Syria. And they had a fantastic civilization of the Assyrians, and then later on they became the Babylonians, and so on. History is very important, but you have to get it right. You cannot come to the cinema 10 minutes or 15 minutes before the end of the film. You don't get it. You have to start where it began. It began here. This is where the Indo-Europeans come from. The western part of India. Indo-Europeans. And in this war of the Devas and the Asuras, and then the Indo-European war between the tribes, it is written in the Battle of 10 Kings that some of the tribes migrated to the north, to what today is called the Asian steppe. They were called Indo-Tocharians and became Turks. Others migrated to the Iranian plateau. They were called Indo-Iranians. They have become Persians. In fact, one of the big tribes of the Indo-Europeans were Parsus. They lived in the western part of India and migrated to Iran. And there were other tribes, the Druhus, who became the Celts, Druids. They went all the way to the eastern part of Europe. The Dassus became the Thracians. They migrated to the north of Greece, Thrace. So during these wars, people have been moving out of the western part of India. Why? It's drying. The whole process of desertification began here. Science today has discovered that the whole region of the Sahara Desert was a tropical forest 5 to 7,000 years BC, before contemporary era. So it is quite imaginable that this whole region from the west of India all the way to the African desert of Sahara were heavily populated, rich areas where we had tropical forests and wetlands and a lot of agriculture and a lot of population. On the other hand, here in the northern part of Europe, it was ice and snow. Nobody, very few people. So it is inconceivable to think that the Aryan people of Europe invaded India. There was nobody there. It's the overflow, the spillover of India moving around, trying to survive. And they have the ancient texts talking about it. The Rig Veda, the Battle of 10 Kings, and then the Mahabharata, Great War. So, what are we talking about Syria? Well, the Assyrians entered here. And then after the Assyrians, we had more people migrating out of India. The Hittites, which in the Indian texts are called Hatti. The Mitanni after that, they spoke Sanskrit. They have Indian names. And when they exited from India, the Hittites colonized a part of Turkey, and they are known as Indo-Europeans. These people were not Indo-Europeans. The Egyptians and Ethiopians were Hamitic. The people in the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, were Semitic. The Indo-Europeans migrated from the west of India all the way through Persia and Turkey. So the Hittites, the Mitannis, had tremendous wars with the Egyptians, with the people who lived in this region. It is the crossroads, but in a terrible sense, the crossroads of war. These people were prosperous, were advanced. They had chariots and weapons. When they exited India, they exited as conquerors. They took the bull with them, the horned bull. So in the Indo-European tradition of the Middle East, the bull is worshipped, the cult of Mithra. So these warriors invaded the Middle East and created Indo-European empires, the Mitanni, the Hittites, and clashed with the ancient Egyptians. What has this to do with today? Everything. Today we have 4 different cultures clashing. We have Turkey, as they say today, Turkey, the Turkish people who are basically Indo-Europeans, although they consider themselves Turks, but their ancestors were Indo-Tocharian, and then in the Asian steppe, they mixed with the Mongols. The Turks themselves say that they are half Aryan and half Mongol. So the Aryan part of the Turks were people, the Indo-Turks who left India. Then we have the Emirates and the Arabians. They're Semitic people. They speak Arabic. They do not speak Indo-European. And then we have the ancient people here who are of Egyptian, Ethiopian ancestry, of Yemen. And recently, the people who were living in Europe but were of Jewish ancestry returned and are living in Israel and are claiming this land for themselves. Because according to them, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, their ancestors lived here. So imagine if the Indo-Persians, Indo-Turks, and Indo-everybody returned to India and kicked out all the Indian people, 1.5 billion, and said it's our land because 5,000 years ago our ancestors lived here. Not a very nice argument. Imagine the American people of color, the Afro-Americans, returning to Africa and saying, please leave, because thousands of years ago we lived here. The people who have been living here, even the people who have returned, Russian Jews, German Jews, all of them have a right to live. But what you cannot do is say it's mine and nobody else has a right. That's why we have war. So the crossroads of people moving from India to the West, trying to survive in search of food, water, in the middle of deserts. So even if 5,000 years ago this region was a tropical paradise full of milk and honey, it's a desert now, and it's becoming even more so. The process of desertification is becoming intolerable. The summers are 50, 60 degrees now. There's no water. This place in the future will become a terrible place. Everybody is interested in it. Why? It's called proxyism, proxy wars. The Americans, through the CIA, want to create problems and keep everybody fighting among themselves so that other people do not become powerful. The people who migrated have to survive. The people who were basically expelled from Europe because they were Jewish have to survive. So it's complicated because everybody thinks that it's my land, I have to survive. In reality, there is space for everyone in the cloud. The world is digital. The world is AI. The world is not desert. You cannot, again, go back 5,000 years ago and say that our ancestors lived here and we want this piece of desert. And the proxy clans and tribes and militias and all these groups who have been trained over the last 50 years by Americans, by the Soviet Union, by the Israelis, all of these militias, some of them are Shia, some of them are Sunni, some of them are of diverse other sects. They are easily manipulated with $1 million, $10 million to create noise. And then we have a lot of noise. And this city was taken and that city was taken. What is happening is what has happened many, many, many times over the last thousands of years. Okay? It's called changing of the guard. Changing of the guard. The people who were there were not doing their job. So people have decided that let's try something else. The Turks are interested because they're in the center of everything that is happening. The Gulf is interested. They're in the center of everything that's happening. The Americans want to keep supporting Israel, so they're interested. And we can see that Russia, China, India are basically exiting this imbroglio, this mess. It's a mess, unfortunately. There's no other word. However, people do not realize that 5-10 years ago, the women and the children have been out migrating. So we have millions of Syrian refugees who have been leaving Syria for a long, long time. 20% of the population of Syria were Christians. Like today, 33% of Lebanon is Christian. Their future in the Middle East is rather complicated, so they decided to migrate. So the women and children have left. The men are there looking for a job, and they have a gun, somebody pays them, and they're mercenaries. So this is the situation. It started 10,000 years ago, and probably it will go on. My idea is to give a historical perspective and to simplify the situation. It's not right and wrong, left or right, black or white. It's a consequence of history, climate, ideology. It's mine. And so everything has a price. But what everybody should understand is that we should not take sides. We should understand perspectives. each side in the conflict have their survival, their future. If there were peace and people could talk and create schools, universities, factories, technological centers, this region within 10 years could become a future Silicon Valley, like the south of India, for example, like Southeast Asia. And a lot of people from India migrated to Thailand, to Indonesia. That's why it's called Indonesia. It's called Indochina. But the people who migrated here have been living in peace and prosperity. But we don't have desertification here. It's very prosperous. There's a lot of fruits and vegetables. Business is good. The desert here creates non-stop stress. So we must have a little bit of compassion, a little bit of understanding, and we hope that all the people involved, from the Gulf Arabs and Saudi Arabia to the Turks, from the Egyptians and Ethiopians and Yemenis to the Israelis, that they realize it's time to flip the script. It's time to flip the script. This is one of the crossroads, which is like a death zone. It's like no man's land. And so centuries and centuries and centuries go by and people are getting killed. But let's hope for the best. So this video was a kind of simplification and explanation for people who have no idea about the Middle East. It is not the Middle East. It is part of West Asia. It is connected to India. No one will understand the Middle East until they understand the last 10,000 years, 5,000 years of Indian history. West Asia is the west of India all the way to Turkey. It is a very important region. It is the basis of the Indo-European language, culture, and civilization. It was a very important prosperity hub. The Indus Valley civilization had a script 6,000 years ago, before everybody else. They had the first factories for bricks. It is there where copper was invented. They had enormous factories, shipyards, and they traded all over the world at that time. Please subscribe so that we can offer more history, more explanations, and help people understand more. Because there is no peace and prosperity without understanding and without compassion. Thank you very much, and come back for the next video.